Creative Writing Mini Workshop.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Repetition in Poetry as Black Disabled Brilliance. I'm your facilitator, Tiezst Ty Taylor. I'm a poet, radical educator, and disability justice advocate. We will go over the agenda for today. I will start with an introduction and your chance to meet me as your facilitator. We'll go through presentation goals. There's an introduction on repetition, Blackness, and disability. I've included tips for close reading poetry. We will explore repetition through a poem, and we have a writing exercise and a brief conclusion. Meet your facilitator, Tiezst Ty Taylor. Tiezst Ty Taylor, they, them, is a disabled Black femme who is non-binary trans. They are a 2025 Pushcart nominee and a radical educator, artist activist, poet, and storyteller, and the self-proclaimed queen of the duplex form. Today we'll actually look at a duplex. Their work explores their experience in surviving disability and severe mental illness, intergenerational trauma and poverty, and intersecting forms of oppression. They use their art and research to educate, heal, nurture, radicalize, and catalyze change for all marginalized people. Ty is a mentee in the 2026 NYC Arts and Education Roundtables New York State Teaching Artist Mentorship Program. Ty's poetry appears or is upcoming in Midway Journal, Show Poetry Journal, Torch Literary Magazine, and Anomaly. I've included an image of me, a light-skinned Black femme. My hair is in faux locks, and I'm smiling. Let's go through the presentation goals. 1, increase exposure to Black poetry. 2, become more aware of connections between Black disability justice and poetry. 3, think more deeply with attention to detail in close reading of poetry. 4, learn to recognize even subtle forms of repetition. And 5, learn to write a poem from a prompt that centers repetition. Introduction: How repetition in poetry, Blackness, and disability intersect. Repetition comes from the oral tradition of storytelling. Black storytelling values repetition. For example, the moral or main lesson of a story is often presented at the beginning and end. Black storytelling values multiple metaphors for one thing. Rhyming is often used to emphasize particular lines as both an alternative to and an accessory of repetition, and repetition is a key part of the blues tradition of poetry, and so is rhyme. Therefore, we can see repetition as a vehicle for access and accessibility, as it increases understanding, gives additional opportunities for comprehension, accommodates various learning needs and styles, and offers reminders of content and form. And you'll see this as we continue through the presentation. These are questions to consider when close reading a poetry. Close reading is kind of what it sounds like. It's looking at a poem closely in the following ways. So these are the questions that you can ask yourself. What is the title of the poem? What is this poem saying? What is the content of the poem? Does this poem have a message or argument? What do the words, lines, style, and form of the poem teach me about it? Today we'll be looking particularly at, is there any repetition in the poem? What exactly is repeating, and what impact does it have? When close reading, you can also ask, who does the title of the poem, how does the title of the poem connect to the content of the poem? Who is speaking in the poem, also known as who is the speaker of the poem? How does the poem make you feel? Is there anything special you notice about this poem? And do you feel differently about anything after reading this poem? If so, what do you feel differently about? For example, do you feel differently about the author, the subject of the poem, society, life, death, anything like that? So I will read a poem. It's called Duplex by Jericho Brown. The word rape is mentioned. Duplex by Jericho Brown. The opposite of rape is understanding. A field of flowers called paintbrushes. A field of flowers called paintbrushes, though the spring be less than actual. Though the spring be less than actual, men roam shirtless as if none ever hurt me. Men roam that myth. In truth, one hurt me. I want to obliterate the flowered field, to obliterate my need for the field, and raise a building above the grasses, a building of prayer against the grasses. My body a temple in disrepair. My body is a temple in disrepair. The opposite of rape is understanding. You may notice several instances of repetition in this poem. I have highlighted some examples of repetition or bolded. And I have an example of close reading this poem, Duplex. Duplex by Jericho Brown has 7 couplets. Couplets are groups of 2 lines, and it has 14 total lines. It is a duplex poem, and its title shares the name of the form. There are 4 instances of repetition in this poem. The first line and last line are exactly the same, which makes me think it is the main idea of the poem. The opposite of rape is understanding. The speaker of the poem is defining rape by its opposite, which suggests both what rape is not, but also what rape is. The second to last line, called the penultimate line, says, "My body is a temple in disrepair." And it was repeated right before that, which means the speaker of the poem feels this is really important to say before the final line or the end of the poem. So here we can see how repetition is emphasizing meaning. Often, if the speaker of the poem or the author wants to emphasize an idea or a line, it will be repeated. And we can look at where the line was repeated to try to understand further. Okay, so we have a writing exercise, which I'm calling poem pre-writing. First, decide on something you would like to convince people about, your Black disabled experience or Crip wisdom. This will be the first and last line of your poem, lines 1 and 4. Choose 3 to 5 words that describe the oppressions and or gifts of being Black and disabled. Try turning those 3 to 5 words into a single line or sentence by filling in the following blank with one of those words. So although you're selecting 3 to 5 for inspiration, you only need one of them for the following fill in the blank. Oh, I wish you knew the blank of my insert name of disability that your poem is about, or you can say diagnosis or condition. This completed line is your title. And after this, I'll go through an example that will clarify how this is written. Then you're choosing one of the following to represent your journey, with disability. These are just some options. You can choose tree, cloud, car, wild beast, cage, the ability to fly, a satisfying meal, a long trip, a cup of coffee, a family, being a child in school, or anything else. This is just meant to inspire you in case you're unable to think of something. And, this something is really a metaphor for your experience with disability or your Crip wisdom. So there's some examples. Feel free to brainstorm as much as you like. Then you're going to write the line. My disability is a blank. Insert chosen word or phrase that has yet to begin or that has run its course. That's going to be your second line. So you're just choosing that has yet to begin or that has run its course. And this is part of the prompt. You're going to choose one of the following to represent what your journey with disability is not. Ticking clock, baby crying, dream fulfilled, full cup, empty river, wild river, bag of tricks, bag of goodies, field of roses, sunny day, or anything else. Again, these items or descriptions are acting as a metaphor. You can choose something that I've included, brainstorm, write your own, whatever works for you. Then you're going to write the line, my disability is not, insert chosen word or phrase, despite what you believe. That becomes the third line. Finally, remember that your final line, line 4, is a repetition of your first line. And basically, in following this prompt, you're going to follow steps 1 through 7 line by line, and you will end up with a 4-line poem. And this is meant to be accessible to people who have been writing poetry before, people who have ideas about metaphors or phrases that they want to use, or someone who's just beginning. It's just meant to be accessible to a wide range of people. And the key point is really the first point. You want to decide what you're convincing people about your Black disabled experience or CRIP wisdom. And that's essentially your argument or your perspective. And that is the first and final line, the same way a duplex has an echoing or repetition of the first and final line. Okay, so just to give you an example of a poem that I wrote using this exact prompt, after you're following the prompt and you have a draft, you would rewrite or retype your poem on a fresh page so that you end up with a 4-line poem, something like this. Title: Oh, I wish you knew the endlessness of my condition. Line 1. Mental illness has its gifts, but its challenges are killing me. Line 2. My disability is a journey that has run its course. Line 3. My disability is not a vacation, despite what you believe. Line 4. Mental illness has its gifts, but its challenges are killing me. And in my description, I broke down the line so you can see how the prompt works. But I will just read this poem. Oh, I wish you knew the endlessness of my condition. Mental illness has its gifts, but its challenges are killing me. My disability is a journey that has run its course. My disability is not a vacation, despite what you believe. Mental illness has its gifts, but its challenges are killing me. So, in this process, in just a prompt for a 4-line poem, you can see how powerful and how evocative it is to have the first line repeat the last line and choosing what you want to say about your own condition in the title, or you could use the word diagnosis, you could use the word disability, and we get a really powerful, punchy 4-line poem that involves the truth telling of our experiences with disability as Black disabled individuals and as truth telling of our experiences. So I hope this prompt will be helpful for you. Okay. So I have some more examples of poetry after the conclusion, but before that, there's been a lot of information. So I just want to tie together the themes that we've been exploring in this presentation before just looking at some other examples of poems by Jericho Brown. What happens when Black disabled people are centered? How much more fulfilling and robust is a future that includes Black disabled voices? When Black disabled people are centered, we center centuries of foundational CRIP wisdom and advocacy that tells us what we always knew, what we always needed to know. We can make a way out of no way. We must. Black disabled brilliance is in our ceaseless fight and advocacy, not just for ourselves, but for the oppressed as a whole, and in our continuous willingness to tell our story, despite if others are open to listening. We model, we enact. Advocate for yourself and others until it becomes a reflex. And I hope that today's prompt that I have tailored for you gives you an experience of telling your story. We are so tired. We do this every day. We deal with medical admin. We deal with systemic injustice. We deal with interpersonal injustice. We're constantly having to tell our stories, and it's tiring, but we can't stop. This is the fight in and out every single day. And obviously, we're fighting for liberation. And we have been doing this for centuries. And we will continue to do this until we are liberated, until everyone is liberated. Thank you for joining us today. Again, I'm Tiezst Taylor, poet, radical educator, and disability justice advocate. I've included my email. You can follow me on Instagram. I'd love to connect. You can email me with any questions about this presentation. And I hope that this has been really helpful for you. It has been such a joy to explore repetition in poetry, to look at the duplex. As I've said, I consider myself the unofficial queen of the duplex form. It's one of my favorite examples of poetry. I love studying Jericho Brown's poetry. And I have just a couple more examples of poetry that have repetition and close reading as just, some bonus material for us today. I've included Works Cited. I have 10 Principles of Disability Justice as a Human Being, which is a poem we'll be looking at today, an article by Jericho Brown called Invention, and also Jericho Brown's book, The Tradition, which has won the Pulitzer Prize, and I highly recommend purchasing. So let's look at the bonus material. So I've given you an example of a poem, which was a duplex, and that worked because repetition and echoing is intrinsic to the duplex form. But just as a bonus, as kind of a mental exercise in continuing one of the intentions of this presentation, which was to expose you to Black poetry and to think deeply about close reading and repetition. What do other examples of repetition look like? If I'm making the argument that many people have made that repetition is a form of Black storytelling, does it always look like the duplex, which has its roots partially in blues poetry? Does repetition always look like blues poetry or the blues tradition? What are some other ways we can use repetition that have perhaps nothing to do with the duplex, that exist in other forms? Or, are there other ways that poetry may echo that kind of essence and blues tradition of the duplex? Let's just engage in curiosity about some of Jericho Brown's poems and what repetition can look like. And then we can use that repetition, not just to close read and think of the impact, but perhaps to write our own poems. Okay. This is a poem by Jericho Brown. And what's interesting about it is that the word yellow is repeated throughout, but it has a different impact every time. And I will let you make your own decisions about that impact. Flower by Jericho Brown. Yellow bird, yellow house, little yellow song, light in my jaundiced mouth. These yellow teeth need brushing, but you admire my yellow smile. This black boy keeps singing, tiny life, yellow bile. What do you notice about this poem? I've indicated that yellow is repeated. Is there anything else repeated? Are there repeating themes, repeating ideas, repeating images? What does the title tell you about this poem? How do you feel at the end of reading this poem? Do you view anything differently? Right? Those are our questions for close reading. I've just highlighted or bolded yellow so that you can see where it's repeated. And then I just added a few details to show um, how you might close read the poem Flower. Flower by Jericho Brown has four stanzas. Stanzas are groups of lines, and there are 16 total lines. Flower has four quatrains, which are four-line stanzas. The word yellow occurs six times across six lines. So you can see that here with the bolded. And I just wanted to highlight not just the word yellow, but just looking again at this poem, something that was new for me in discovering this poem was I think when I write poetry, I often feel like I always want to say something new with every line. And of course, there can be emphasis with repetition, which I still value. And I want to continue to flex my muscles of using repetition because it's a part of craft and poetry. But I've never repeated one word so many times. You can see that the lines in the poem are pretty short, but again, yellow occurs so many times. And for me, I thought, well, if I repeat a word this much, I am repeating myself. Like maybe that's boring or maybe that's overly repetitive. But here, Jericho Brown, in his brilliance, shows you what you can achieve in not just placing a word throughout, but placing it with attention to detail and deep intention. And, you can decide on the impact yourself, but I think this is a beautiful poem. And in so few words, Jericho Brown really takes you on a journey. I don't think I'll ever think about yellow the same way. Okay, so we have another poem by Jericho Brown. And you may ask yourself when I read this poem, what are the instances of repetition? What is repeating? How often is it repeating? And what is the impact? As a Human Being by Jericho Brown. There is the happiness you have and the happiness you deserve. They sit apart from one another, the way you and your mother sat on opposite ends of the sofa after an ambulance came to take your father away. Some good doctor will stitch him up, and soon an aunt will arrive to drive your mother to the hospital, where she will settle next to him forever as promised. She holds the arm of her seat as if she could fall, as if the only sturdy thing, as if it is the only sturdy thing. And it is since you've done what you always wanted. You fought your father and won, marred him. He'll have a scar he can see all because of you. And your mother, the only woman you ever cried for, must tend to it as a bride tends to her vows, forsaking all others, no matter how sore the injury. No matter how sore the injury has left you, you sit understanding yourself as a human being, finally free that nobody's got to love you. I have highlighted or bolded the instances of repetition. We have no matter how sore the injury, followed by no matter how sore the injury has left you. So just quickly close reading as a human being. As a Human Being by Jericho Brown has one stanza. A stanza is a group or groups of lines and has 27 total lines. There's only one instance of repetition in this poem. The line, no matter how sore the injury, repeats back to back. And just in going back to this poem, it's just one stanza. This is the longest poem we're looking at today by Jericho Brown. And it just really begs the question of, if you were only using repetition once, how would you use it? If you had to emphasize only one line, one metaphor, one idea, what would that be? And so I feel like I'm looking at this poem as a master class of just sometimes there's a quiet impact of repetition. As a poet and as somebody telling your story about Black disability justice, your Black disabled experience, your Crip wisdom, you can choose in a poem to just emphasize one thing artfully, to leave an impression and leave an impact upon your audience, upon the reader, upon society. So I want to leave you with this question of, if you had to repeat one thing, if you were making a plea to society, to someone you know, to the government, even to yourself about being Black and disabled, what would that plea be? And it doesn't have to be a plea. You can stand on business. What would your statement be about your Crip wisdom and Black disabled experience if you could only repeat one thing? And so I'll take us back to the slide on the writing exercise. And just to inform you about my lived experience, as I said in the prompt, which is the previous slide, you don't have to highlight, even though we're choosing words to experience the oppressions or the gifts. Maybe your perspective or what you want to leave the reader with in this four-line poem isn't about oppression. Maybe you are sitting in the glory of the gifts of being Black and disabled, or even something else. This prompt can be used again and again, and that's the beauty of using a writing prompt. I can't tell you about your experience of being Black and disabled. That would be antithetical to Black storytelling and the power of your own voice, right? So it's what do you want to share? What impression do you want to leave yourself, society, other individuals with at the end of this poem? And for me, in this four-line poem, I had been, I have been impacted and honestly stuck in the endlessness of my condition. That is why in the prompt I chose endlessness, because to live with disability, it's going to be the rest of my life. And yes, that tells me that advocacy is also going to be the rest of my life. But again, I'm tired, you know. And I did want to highlight my own disability, which is centered on mental illness. And so I chose gifts, but also challenges. And as the metaphor, I chose a journey because that's what it is. That's what I see life as. And that was one of the examples from the prompt. I also wanted to include that my disability was not a vacation, because there's this concept of being on disability benefits and, being lazy, not having to work, being rich on benefits, and, thinking that it's a cakewalk. And it's not that. And I want people to understand that although you may have the perspective of disability being easy, it's not that at all. Just going back to the title and that emphasis, it is endless. And again, with the repetition of line 4 in this prompt, I wanted to leave the reader with this impression. Mental illness has its gifts, but its challenges are killing me. And the reason why I wanted to bring this full circle back to the prompt is because, yes, I want this to be a prompt that you can use again and again. I want this prompt to be shared, and I want us to have a shared way of telling our story with the highest impact in the least amount of lines. Thank you so much for being with us today. I really hope that this prompt was helpful to you. I hope that you leave this presentation with some information that can impact your life and that you can carry with you and hopefully share. Thank you so much.